So noise, I think the beauty of noise is that it's always like very consumer first, product first. The growth mindset is the single biggest motivator for me. And this is again not visceral to a lot of organizations. Like almost like what, 7 million MAUs would be on the platforms and are fairly sticky. I'm like, what 7 million MAUs is great. The unit economics and P&L hygiene is something which is very, very central to noise.
So Noise is a market leader in the space of wearables. It's a bootstrap company which has scaled to a few thousand crore levels of revenue now. Very exciting journey where they've come in with their customer centricity and tech savviness with the product. What's very fascinating about the conversation with Gaurav today is the fact that he comes with a 15-year experience in the digital space. The fact that Yahoo was doing a deep dive at personalization back in 2008 is very fascinating. And the obsession with data as a source of power, as a source of differentiation, came also from his time at Car Dekho and OLX. So, in the world of noise, he's trying to move a product-centric company to a services mindset where the expansion of a relationship with the consumer can be quite huge, given that they have 7 million monthly active users, given that they have all these watches out there in the market and all these consumers who are replacing their watches every 18 months now instead of 2 years earlier. So the category is great and they've had a dominant market share already in place and they are continuing to retain that position. So let's hear it from Gaurav as to how they're playing it out for noise and what data and customer centricity means in their world. Gaurav, very quickly would love to understand a bit of your journey and then tell us a bit about, what's the secret sauce behind noise, how is it shaped up to where it is? And then we'll delve a little further into this whole aspect of what user engagement and retention means in your world.
No, thanks for inviting me on your podcast. I think I'm looking forward to our discussion today. About me being 15 years in digital, got into digital fairly early, Yahoo, then OLX. I'm like 4 years at OLX, chief marketing officer over there. Then I joined Car Dekho, almost 5 odd years, marketing, content head. And a couple of years with Zoopy, a real money gaming company. And now for the past 5 months, I'm here at Noise. So this category is quite interesting. The first time I'm actually coming from a digital services to a product company.
Yeah.
So steep learning curve, but I think it's a great category to be in and an even better company to be in. Bootstrap, which is a rarity in, so bootstrapped and still being a market leader in a big category, I think that's a very rare thing to achieve. And I think those are the reasons because of which I said, yeah, okay, this looks like an interesting place to be.
Absolutely.
Great people, great place. Yeah, so here I am.
So far loving it, 5 months, huh? But 15 years in digital seems like you made that choice very early in your career that this is where I want to be, or it so happened in your first role?
I think I made it consciously. I'm like, everything is like, always better 2020 in hindsight. But then I think even at that time I had like, two choices. I'm like, go to the IT powerhouses or go to Yahoo. Back in 2008. I don't know why, but I thought that digital is going to be big. And Yahoo was Yahoo. The mothership of all digital internet. So it's going to be an interesting one. So I got into digital very, very consciously. I think Yahoo taught me a lot of things which are still very, very relevant. I'm like, we're going to be talking a lot about like personalization, engagement. And I think Yahoo was super ahead of the curve even at that time. And the whole man-machine relationship that they had kind of identified and executed was insanely powerful. So I think a lot of things that we discussed today, and obviously at a much more evolved scale, Yahoo was already deploying at scale.
And you talk about Yahoo of 2008, which means you're still able to find relevance 15 years later. That says something about the level of progress that they've made.
Fantastic company. I think I'm like, just made some choice which didn't play off well.
I'm sure. I mean, that's, I think, for a lot of brands, that can be a situation in the journey. Regardless, tell us about Noise, Gaurav. You've been around 5 months now, and I think you know enough about the company's history and journey. You made the choice to join this product play, so to speak. With all the constraints of a bootstrap player while being a market leader, it means a certain level of discipline, a certain level of philosophical stance. Tell us more about Noise.
So Noise, I think the beauty of Noise is that it's always like very consumer first, product first. And I think both the founders, Amit and Gaurav, were able to understand, what are the needs and wants as they were like, just starting to shoot, green shoot. And that's where I think the product strategy also followed from. So I think, which is where like a lot of like young companies, they find their feet in terms of finding the product market fitment. But I think both Amit and Gaurav had that insight or consumer centricity, where they understood that this is something which is going to be big. And then the second lever that they worked on very, very strongly was that product first approach. So from consumer centricity to product first, where, I mean, like, how do you have a product which delivers what it promises and looks good while it does that? So I think those two things really worked well.
In some sense, also super crowded as a category, right? I mean, when they launched, probably there was not that many, but then there's now, I don't know how many people importing watches and trying to sell them.
I look at it like both ways, right? I'm like, on one side, we can definitely say that it's a crowded place, but I think for any category which is just like starting to grow, I think having more people also helps accelerate the category.
Sure. There are more people advertising watches, so there'll be more people wanting watches. But then of all those people who are wanting watches, you become the default choice in some
Absolutely.
sense.
So I mean, like, I understand why we compete with them, but I'm like, on a very, very macro basis, if I were to just like not wear my noise hat, I mean, like, any industry that sees competition is good for the consumer.
Which would also mean all these guys which become short-term spikes in aggression, which will end up dying down because they'll not be viable, is good for you because somebody helped contribute to category creation and then fade away.
And also like shows the consumer, I'm like, what is, I'm like, which players to believe in. I mean, like, because if you like just get too used to all the good things in life, then there's no perspective. So regardless of what others do, I'm fairly at ease. I mean, like, with others coming in, welcome them. We know what we do. So I'm fairly at ease.
Interesting. But so in some sense, what is that one thing that makes a consumer prefer your products over the others? I'm sure there's a lot more nuance in terms of the product components and functionalities and features and those things. But those are tangibles. In my impression, there's also some amount of non-tangible that you've established from a brand philosophy or identity or how you've got brand endorsements in place. How does that story play out?
Look, we are in a lifestyle tech category, right? I mean, like, anytime that these two things get disassociated is when you start to shortchange the consumer on an emotional level. And I think that's what like Noise did really well. I mean, lifestyle tech was always coupled with each other. If you're only about tech, become very niche. You stop appealing to the irrationality or the emotional perspective of the product buying experience. If you become too lifestyle, then you become just too gimmicky.
Not
and I
tech.
think, yeah, exactly. I'm like, tech is like, compromised upon. So I think that is maybe the secret sauce where you appeal to the rationality and the irrationality both. And that's where, apart from the hygiene factor, which is like, oxygen sahi batata hai, tracking sahi karta hai, and all that kind of stuff. Do you feel good while you wear it? I'm wearing Halo Plus right now, and I can walk into pretty much any room wearing the same. Those are the emotional benefits.
Yeah.
And I think from the imagery that was created, and I think once our brand ambassadors also like took that legacy forward. Yeah, that's what.
It sounds fairly simple, but it's probably the part that most people tend to miss, as you just said, that you'll be amazing on the brand side, but the technology will not deliver.
Yeah.
Or you might be amazing on the technology side, but the brand is like whatever. So it's not as something that you'll emotionally resonate with.
And like all young companies, I'm like, for a fairly, I'm like, at least in the early stages of their life, are a reflection of the founder's DNA. And between like Samit and Gaurav, they were like always had like this complementary point of view. I'm like, one is a tech maven, one is like a consumer focused person, and so on and so forth. So I think both of them had an equal.
So some degree of, let's say, mutual pressure built in to make sure that this is tech-wise amazing and this is consumer-wise well promised and well delivered.
And I think they like, got to a place where it is never like either or.
Sure.
कि यार इसको केवल ये बनाते हैं, इसको ये बनाते हैं, and all that. There has to be a basic level of hygiene on all fronts, and then you kind of uplift the whole.
So in some sense, there's a degree of push and pull involved between the founders that ultimately brings out the best on both sides.
Absolutely.
Regardless.
And then you make the investments also. I mean, like, do you invest in like, say, new product development? Do you invest in innovation from a product perspective? Do you invest in like, the right marketing teams who have like the creativity to bring it all to life? The product people who can like, make those things come alive on the touch points. So I think fairly progressive from the original DNA, and I think that's what
worked out pretty well for them in that sense. So, in very simple terms, while I'll not delve a lot into the whole acquisition side, but what's interesting is you guys are bootstrapped. You guys are profitable at some level, by and large. And you also have brand ambassadors and you're spending a fair bit in terms of the brand side of things as well. So how does the math work out? And, is this just to say that, whatever you're selling on the product side of it from marketplaces or the direct-to-consumer channels, on the retail channels as well, unit economics are tightly watched and controlled and managed, and that's working out.
Yeah, the second part is absolutely true. I think that's where the short answer is. I think unit economics and P&L hygiene is something which is very, very central to Noise. I think, and obviously, the macros also helped. The boosting of Noise. The past 3 odd years. COVID coming in, and like, the increased focus towards
obsession of fitness,
wearables and all that. And if you have a good product, then I think the macros helped us. That is a tailwind that boosted
that
us.
applied to the category, and you somehow took advantage of that tailwind and got a lion's share out of it.
Yeah, and then the word of mouth kicks in. If you're doing a job, then I think you get like 10 other people to talk about.
So in some sense, being a market leader has a share of disproportionate returns on effort, because whoever's coming into the category, a large number of them will come to noise.
Absolutely, because economies of scale is a reality, right? And because of which you keep on driving the cost of productions down and so on and so forth. Or the logistics kind of keep on coming down, which you kind of pass on to the consumers also. And that's where it also becomes like a fairly high quality product at a price point that doesn't pinch you. It's a magic ingredient.
In some sense, that's a flywheel that's constantly going to help matters, because you have more scale, better costing, better pricing, and
absolutely.
You help me a little bit with the whole portfolio approach as to how is that shaped and what is the philosophy here, because we just happened to buy one of your kid products, the Noise Buddy, or Noise Scout, I think, which has the app on the phone as well. So fascinating, but I'm just curious about the philosophy, because generally as a product, I would not have too many as an individual, perhaps. Maybe I'll have a watch, maybe the earphones. But what is that nature of, how does the portfolio look like? How do you see it from a single consumer lens, or is this more of expanding to more consumers?
So I think you always start with the most lowest hanging fruit, right? So you'll have like people in the age group of 18 to 24 and 15 to 24, let me put it this way, who are like, early technology adopters. And they are like, if you look at like 15 to 24, there are like many life stages changes from student to college to say postgrad and a first job. So in a course of like 8 to 9 years, you have like 4 or 5 different life stages. And then maybe if you extended 30, then you're also getting married. Then the needs and wants change. What do you want out of your health, from your lifestyle, and so on and so forth, which is where I think we saw that people wanted such a companion. And which is where I think you create a product for that particular cohort upfront. But then you see that this is adopting the product, they're talking well about it, and then you kind of like move into the next use cases. So you bought like a Scout as a parent of young kids. This thing becomes very critical. Your kids are going for tuitions and so on and so forth. You need another use case. So I think that again, going back to the whole consumer centricity point, what are the other use cases that we can deliver
in some sense? You spoke about this whole 15 to 30 age and life stages. Is the product portfolio designed to cover different needs throughout these different stages? Is that the nature of, let's say, model number 1 versus model number 2 versus model number 3? Is this appealing to different ages?
Yeah, so at different, your first point of contact with this particular category might be around, like, say, at 15, 18, you are not like necessarily like, thinking about the ill effects of not having a healthy body. Right? So maybe it's a lifestyle gadget.
It's a lifestyle thing. Yeah. Style statement of sorts.
Exactly. But as you go forward, then you're looking at like, hey, I need to exercise and so on and so forth. And which is where you unlock like more things. And then your product portfolio also like, starts to mimic that thing.
Well, sometimes, just curious, well, of course, you've not had that level of vintage of 15 years, I guess. You'll still have a bunch. So would you see people graduating from, let's say, now they had this and now they're having this and having this? Over a 5-7 year time window, you have, let's say, a consistent customer who's graduating from level 1 to level 2.
Yeah, in fact, we've seen like, shifts happening on that consumer behavior also. So maybe a couple of years back, it was about 2 years replacement cycle, where you upsell to
next version,
to a different segment altogether. Now we are seeing that happening at about 18 months.
Wow.
So you almost like shaving off like, 25% of your replacement
which
cycle.
Is great, right?
Yeah, it is. And then you see कि अब इसको और क्या मिल सकता है where this person is
now you started 10 only because that's the Scout product, right?
No, and that is like aimed at the parents more than the kids. Also, right?
No, but trust me, the demand is driven by the kids, because my friend has it. I also want it. Functionality be damned.
Yeah. No, like yesterday also we launched something which is like for a little bit older kids also.
Yeah.
So again, you unlock like more and more use cases, which is where I think the category also starts to take root a little bit more strongly. I think that's the way like we are also shaping our portfolio. Like recently, just to give you an example, not necessarily only through age, but through gender also. We launched something called Diva. Noise Diva. A couple of months back, actually less than a couple of months back. If you look at like one of the biggest drivers has been like, ki dial kitna bada hai and all that kind of stuff, right? So 1.9, 1.6, 1.9 and all that. But then if you were to like, just put the consumer centricity hat again, then you see that the wrist sizes for women might be a little bit like,
slightly
smaller than
smaller.
what males would have. So like, oh, okay, this is why this is not working. So I'm like, you launch like a form factor which is from the physicality much more attuned
More
to.
suited for a female.
And did
wearer.
very well. I think I think it sold much more than we anticipated on that particular watch. So you unlock like different use cases.
And this is all a function of, let's say, some sort of consumer insights that you'll just keep discovering. And because you're that much more consumer centric and you control your supply chain better, your responsiveness to insights is relatively faster. So I'm going to zoom into now the whole post-purchase side of things, because that's where a larger part of relationship building happens. So while it's quite amazing that you anyway have a profitable equation on the unit level when you're selling a product, but there's a lot of value to unlock once somebody's got a product, because invariably they'll also have a mobile app, and you have millions of those users who have your watches and now the apps as well. How does it play out? And let's pick up one segment and just understand this whole post-purchase journey, where you currently are, what would you love to do, where you headed in that world.
As I said, I'm like, it's lifestyle tech. I'm like, while some people might be more lifestyle oriented, some people will be like looking at more about health and fitness and so on and so forth. One thing that I've like learned, I'm like, having been in internet for the past 15 odd years, is you have to educate the consumers. It can't be like, you just let them have the goods or services and then imagine that they'll be running through the entire 100% of what that product offers. So that's where post-purchase, if you have to like, have like, what is that one filter or one objective that you want to optimize for from post-purchase perspective, it's more about like education.
Okay.
Right. So once you bought a watch and you've downloaded the NoiseFit app, you activated the watch. Now the whole thing is that a lot of us are like very well-intentioned people. We want to like, kickstart our health journey and so on and so forth, but we might not necessarily know how to go about it. Even if you know about it, I'm like, a lot of times, if you're doing it individually or all alone, not being a part of the community, it's not just about like your interaction with, say, a noise watch. I'm like, we as human beings have certain like, reservations about how we engage with the product and service. Once that decoding happens, then you start to like, use that for your education and engagement.
Okay.
So, and then you build like your product features around that thing.
Okay.
So like we'll have something called communities. So hey, can you come and like, actually be a part of a certain community that you want to be a part of? Do you want to like actually, if you don't want to like, say you're getting bored by like, doing your steps on a daily basis, would you like say invite a friend of yours and like, have a streak challenge with that person and so on and so forth.
A lot of room for gamification somewhere, right?
Exactly. But then they all come from a real place. And then that's where the whole post-purchase education / engagement starts.
In some sense, it's also habit formation, because everything about fitness will need a certain degree of discipline.
Absolutely.
And if you're aiding that process, then you automatically end up being a larger part of that person's behavioral transformation.
And that's where I'm like the whole word of mouth also kicks in.
That I will end up inviting a friend of mine to compete on steps, and then both of us are more engaged with the application.
Absolutely.
Let's double click on one of these examples maybe and understand what that flow really looks like, and how that influences some degree of metric which you care about. Right. So let's say you launch this whole community feature that as a user I could join a runners community, or maybe a joggers, or maybe weightlifters community. How does that translate into deeper user engagement and the metrics that you truly care about?
As I said, like, while we have done one thing well, 24 months, 18 months replacement cycle is coming. But if we just look at transaction as the only endpoint, as the only touch point, then we're going to be waiting 18 months for that person to talk to us.
Absolutely.
And that's where the larger piece of like creating an ecosystem that really does well for the people who are putting their trust and money in you. And you also like, making an ecosystem which is like giving the right levers for that person to stay engaged with you.
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. So if you have, say, challenges on the NoiseFit app, where we gamify the entire thing. Hey, I'm like, this is a particular challenge. I'm like, stick to it. If you're like, really doing well, then you gain certain points and so on and so forth, which obviously you can like redeem and so on. So how do you actually make people first be aware of that particular thing? Because as I said, I'm like,
this exists.
Yeah. As a user, you've got so many choices to make in a finite amount of time. You would be super arrogant to think that once you sold your product and service, the person will
automatically do whatever.
It's just a super arrogant statement to make. And which is where the whole engagement strategy then comes into play. Maybe a little bit of like experimentation at first. Maybe this guy like feeds is a social product, right? I'm like, what are other people doing on their social, health journeys and lifestyle journeys? Maybe I'm like, some people will be just like competitive from a nature perspective. Hey, challenge with my friends, challenge with the community, and then see where I end up. Contrary to, say, the popular perception that मैं ये इसलिए कर रहा हूँ ताकि मुझे कुछ coins मिल जाएंगे and all that. I think that is a good to have, not a must have.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm like, the if you really create an environment which is like, runs on its own steam, then I don't think people like, are saying कि मैं इसलिए कर रहा हूँ क्योंकि मुझे coins मिलेंगे and so on and so forth.
Okay.
The beauty of it unlocks when you're actually like, talking to that segment, understanding ki what is more relevant for this person and then curating that environment for that person.
Okay.
What that does is it just like makes us that much more intelligent about a person's habits regarding the health suite, or how by indulging in certain activities, are your health matrix going up, and so on and so forth.
Okay.
So like I just started playing golf.
Sure.
So I always like, in the morning when I'm playing say 9 hole, I'm like, I'll always have my watch on. It's almost like a positive reinforcement. By the time I played my 9 holes, maybe I'd done about 9,000 steps. And almost like say 300 calories.
Sure.
Right. And next time I'm actually playing golf, this is my added advantage also. So I'm not necessarily like only looking at like, hitting a good shot. But at the end of the day, I'm like, oh, okay,
Right,
that's a pretty cool thing. I just like, gives me that added kick to my established practices outside the. And then that's where I'm saying, I'm like, I'm not necessarily like looking at my watch or the noise for the ecosystem, कि मेरे को इससे कुछ मिलेगा and all that kind of stuff, कि coins मिलेंगे, redeem करूँगा and all that. I think just the whole journey itself, if you can like create like fairly decent levers, then people engage
Boils down
with it.
to a consumer insight around motivation, right? As to what would motivate individual 1 versus individual 2 might be potentially different.
Yeah.
And to find a convincing answer to this might also not be a universal answer.
No, it can't be.
So would this then become a slightly more experimental approach than the deliberate approach we have for products?
Absolutely.
So what's been your, let's say, the first few definitive wins and okay, this is what we've understood about human motivation and fitness, and this is how we're orchestrating this in the product.
No, the whole thing about like, the thing about like, the insight that even if when you start off on your health journeys, the first thing is, I'm like, you are not going to be optimizing on anything till the time you don't know about it.
Okay.
Right. So awareness is like a big thing, right?
Sure.
So I'm like, which is where the app is designed in such a way. I'm like, if you just take this insight and then you say, hey, I'm going to create an app which makes a person aware of his or her, I'm like, health matrix in a very easily digestible manner. That's the first port of call. I'm like, कि at least like जो तुम कर रहे हो, उसका तुम्हें मालूम भी होना चाहिए कि क्या हो रहा है, उसका impact.
In level 1, in terms of my health states, there's this weighing scale which would be from a whatever brand, and they'll tell you all the different components of your, let's say, fat. This is much versus this much subcutaneous, whatever else. But in your lens, whatever you're able to capture will end up being about the exercise or fitness regimen, and then you'll package that into something which is.
I think that's the second level. I'm just saying कि I'm like, first just like make the person take baby steps कि भाई क्या-क्या चीजें तुम्हारे को मालूम होनी चाहिए.
हाँ, but आपके पास static, let's say, health profile. If I were to talk about my D0 situation, what would be amazing is if I put on a watch and it tells me that these are 20 things that are wrong with your body, and now in order to fix this is what you should do. That would be amazing. But I wonder, from a data capturing and data collection perspective, you won't have all of that.
No, we won't have that.
So how do we, so when you say that this is a starting point, your current status?
Yeah.
Are you saying that you'll make me do a few things and then that will give me a result?
No, I'm saying you on an even much more basic level. Okay, I'm like, I just like gave you the example of my golf journey, right? I'm like, I'm starting to play golf, but I also understood कि मैं 300 calories भी burn करता हूँ. Right? Just like, the whole thing, what all happens to your body when you're doing this. Just to make you aware as a consumer, that these are things that you need to know about, right? Then the second higher order question that we try and make people aware of is like, now that you know that these are 4 or 5 things that you should be aware about, which are the places that you can actually engage while having fun and like, actually optimizing on all these metrics.
So how do you do better on all these metrics while having a good time in some sense?
Absolutely, because like, all of us are like a little bit lazy when we start off on our health and fitness journey.
Habit formation is a hard journey, right? Most people will end up giving up in whatever, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days.
Yeah, and then that's the insight that like
gym memberships, right?
Yeah. So and that's the insight that like, starts to help make us features like your feeds and challenges and communities and all that. That you're not alone in this whole thing. I'm like, and then in case I'm like, hey, first of all, there are like, many people like you. I'm like, find them in the community. So you're not alone. I'm like, people are doing whatever. They may be like burning 50 calories, but they're proud of it. and they're posting on it. So don't beat yourself too much about it.
Sure.
And as you keep on like going down that road, then you keep on like, okay, maybe there are some challenges that we have for you.
Okay.
And once you actually go through that, hey, I'm like, which are those people that you want to compete against now? That's a very active participation.
That would mean the network effects start to kick in, because if I were part of that community and my friends who are supposed to be competing with me are also using the same app and I can see their stats, this whole mutual tracking also ends up being a bit of a mutual accountability play.
Yeah.
And if it's gamified, then it's a challenge play.
Absolutely.
So in some sense, this whole classic gamification, but taken a little more real, is a powerful human motive. It is.
Yeah, because it comes from a place of reality, right?
Sure.
I'm like, you know, this is what all of us go through.
Yeah. So this whole challenge thing works out. But you spoke about this whole journey starting at 15 from a lifestyle-ish lens and to a more fitness orientation lens. And that's an age lens and a life stage lens as well.
Yeah.
So from your lens, you spoke about the aspect of gamification helping matters when it comes to fitness as a priority in some sense, right? But would you look at, let's say, phase 2 of this? The challenge in the community is one part. What happens next from here? Or is this applicable to the entire audience, or do you say that, okay, these people are going to be indifferent to the challenge? Like you're a golf player, but you don't necessarily care about competing or counting your steps with somebody else. So how does that set of other plays looks like? Because in some sense, gamification has become at least theoretically well understood. I mean, not many people would do a great job at applying it. It applies very naturally to your category, so it makes sense. But are there other experiments you've run where you've seen some success?
So I think the whole thesis or the playbook as we are writing it, I'm like, you know, so this is like something which can be deployed or is useful for a large group of people. A lot of people will actually say, yes, I agree with this statement, or this particular feature, what it's unlocking, it's relevant for me, right? So I'm like, that's the larger piece. And as you say, if I were to just like, you know, draw an imaginary pyramid, maybe this is like the base case that starts to happen. Hey, I mean, like, you know, we are helping you at least like be a part of the whole fitness community and giving you all the tools and the bells and whistles to be engaged. The secondary, and as you go high, I'm like, there'll be some people who will be like very, very happy being here, but there'll be some people who are like, what more, right?
Sure.
And those kind of reality.
What more or what else, or maybe both?
Yeah. I'm like, you know, what more or what else, and so on and so forth.
When I say what else, this is not relevant for me. I want something else. Vis-a-vis, I'm good with this, I like this, but I want more. Yeah,
so maybe what more? I'm like, for me, I'm like, you know, what more? I'm like, you know, so maybe I'm like a person like me would say, hey, I'm like, can you give me a much more vertical, deep down experience on golf per se, right? I'm like, you know, can it give me a little bit deeper understanding? I'm like, you know, when I hit like say off the tee, is my heart rate higher? Or when I'm putting,
am I really stressed out?
When I'm putting for a par, I'm like, is that heart rate higher? I'm like, you know, I'm just joking, but then I'm like, you know, those are the kind of things I would like to know about.
Start to interpret from the data itself.
Yeah, so like different kind of like, you know, say activities that even right now noise kind of caters to. I'm like, you know, people are going to be asking those questions much more. And then you cohortize accordingly, and then you make your product and, you know, also follow that particular approach. Can you actually make a vertical experience within the whole health suite?
Okay. This will not, I mean, in some sense, will it stand parallel in the kind of data you're capturing? Because now watches capture the steps, of course, but they also capture heart rate. Some of them got blood pressure. Some of them have also got the ECG equivalent. Some of them capture stress levels, my sleep routines. I don't think a watch is yet capturing my calorie intake or my blood sugar levels, but I would imagine at some point a non-intrusive way will get discovered and you'll probably be the first people to launch it. So from that lens, when you're talking about this verticalized / depth side of things, are you saying that we end up capturing more data as we mature from a product lens and then package that into more consumable insights, so to speak?
Yeah, some of it is just product led, right? I mean, like, you know, as you rightly said, like, you know, blood sugar, right? It requires a little bit of like, say, augmentation to the product, right? I'm like, you know, the current sensor, the sensor in this particular watch might not be, but then the technology is there.
It's evolving, sure.
Yeah, right? So I'm like, you know, how do you like get this into this form factor is the product augmentation.
Yeah.
The second piece is just to understand how the whole, how to make sense of that particular data and present it in that manner where people say, yeah, now I understand.
It's usable.
Exactly.
Sure.
As I said, keep driving versus putting. Correct. But I'm actually getting that insight and so on and so forth. And you can stretch this whole expectation to a very broad level. A healthcare professional, right? And it's not about like, you know, sports. It's not about fitness. It's not about activity. But then I'm like, you know, a healthcare professional might say, hey, I'm like, you know, I've got like say 10 critical care patients.
And I watch all of these metrics on my phone.
Yeah. I mean, like, you know, or maybe I'm like, you know, say some people who are under his or her watch, I mean, who are chronically, say, unwell.
Sure.
Might not be in the hospital, but can I track their
basic
health
metrics,
and so on and so forth. So you'll have like many use cases by which you can like, keep on building vertical experiences. But the entire thing will like come from the fact that once you've got a thesis ready, right? I'm like, then you have to have like the right mindset and the right infra to actually do that segmentation and cohortization very well. Otherwise, I mean, like, a thesis really doesn't come to life.
Yeah, in some sense, because the journeys will start to diverge at some point, because somebody who's a chronic patient of, let's say, a certain situation will end up having a very different set of metrics he cares about, the kind of interventions he would expect and need from perhaps a automated system. You know, for instance, my watch does tell me that you've been sitting for too long, get up and start walking, because you won't end up completing your steps. And this could also potentially mean that you're eating too much, stop, because otherwise your sugar is going to go rush, or your calorie count for the day might just go crazy. So in some sense, this whole, I mean, it's at the end of the day a data collection system and a data packaging and application system that you're doing. And that's all human body-led data, right? So whatever parameters you know about me, you can start giving me a certain directional sense from that lens.
Absolutely.
But what would be interesting to understand, Gaurav, is from your lens, you spoke about the whole community and engagement from that lens, which is habit formation. You spoke about one level above that, people who want more than this, where would they head? And there is a degree of verticalization that can happen. In terms of the given the fact that a lot of people will be opening your apps every day and they'll be looking at a bunch of things which are perhaps going well for them or perhaps not going well for them, and what kind of interventions they need to make could have different divergent paths as well. And it could be services they could consume, it could be guidance they could consume, content they could consume, or products they could consume. And each of these has its own potential monetizability, right? If I were to start consulting a physical coach that, okay, I need to run, but I need to also figure my pre and post and whatever. So help me with advice. Some of that could be automated using a bot or whatever with standard content. But then there is always room to have a guy who will consult me for 15 minutes every day, and then that can play out. And all of this is linked fairly interestingly to monetization and subsequent engagement with users. Would love to understand some of these experiments that you've either done already or you plan to do.
Yeah, so if you look at like say any digital business, like let alone us, more often than not, you'll find that there's an offline precedent for it.
Sure.
Right?
Really? Be it an interesting lens to apply, Vaise.
Sorry?
That's an interesting lens to apply, but sure.
Yeah, like for say any OTA selling a ticket, they were like offline agents doing that.
Sure.
For any, I'm like,
it just becomes more efficient online in some sense.
Yeah, no, and that's what digital brings. I'm like, real time. I'm like, scalable. I'm like, maybe like I was at Car Dekho earlier, right? I'm like, how do you like, make that information go to a person who doesn't have that showroom in his or her town? Is something that so the delivery becomes easier.
Slightly
you can
more.
like
I mean,
do
a
it
lot
at
of
scale.
information asymmetry will get bridged because it's just come online.
I actually use that term a lot. It's good that you did
asymmetry.
that.
Okay, yeah. I mean, for the whole exchange play, everything, Naukri, matrimony is.
It's all information asymmetry that you're trying to solve for, right? And just put that lens on the question that you just asked. I'm like, a coach and so on and so.
Yeah.
I might not have that coach. I'm like, where I stay. But then I'm like, is that information asymmetry being like, tackled by, say, a noise
discovery
ecosystem and so on and so forth. I think that's where the whole playbook kind of takes us, which is a content play, which is like an ecosystem play.
Yeah.
And I think
very powerful ecosystem play there, right?
It is. And why I'm like there are ecosystem plays outside. I'm like, people have created ecosystems where I think it becomes fairly interesting because this is about a fairly central part of your daily existence.
Absolutely.
Right. So if you can like really create something which is adding a lot of value to your health, to your lifestyle on a daily basis, then I think it's a fairly precious thing for any person.
So it's very clear that you're convinced about this from a deliberation standpoint. Experiment-wise, anything you've done and seen success with?
So as I said, I mean, this whole feeds, communities, and challenges, that's something
digital side of it is established now.
Yeah, so that kind of came into the last 12 months.
Okay.
Right, so I'm like, a lot of experimentation happened in the last 12 months and we're keeping on refining and learning key. Just to give you a perspective, after actually deploying these things, these features, I'm like, from an outside-in approach, where consumer wants something, we kind of like, maybe these features did this thing. Our retention rates have tripled.
Okay.
In the past 3 months.
Are you able to put a number to it?
No. But yeah, I mean, like, there's a fairly high degree of trajectory over there.
Sure.
But then, but I'll give you like a perspective of the scale, right? I'm like almost like what? 7 million MAUs would be on the platforms.
Yeah.
More than
a large scale.
It's a large scale, right? And a fairly sticky, I'm like, what 7 million MAUs is great. But then a DAO of
You
like
want a
upwards
DAO.
of a DAO of 1 million. I mean,
Huh.
that's what makes it like a fairly sticky.
Exciting space.
Yeah, and that's where, I mean, we saw
And
like
you'll
a
keep
huge uptick.
expanding that in some sense, and that's
Yeah.
where you're saying the delta has come from your community efforts.
Absolutely. So while the like the MAUs would keep on increasing because of the acquisitions that are
Sure.
happening and so on and so
Yeah.
forth, or the upselling that keeps on happening. But the DAO increasing is like a great point towards these experiments actually paying off fairly well, and that's where we've seen like a threefold increase in the past 12 months.
In some sense, what would be the engagement lens? I'm assuming that there is a certain set of communications, either manual or automated, that would get triggered at various stages, and that would, in some sense, contribute to this now getting better. Are you able to deep dive a little bit into what this looks like and what kind of impact have you seen from there?
So I'll give you an example. Again, a little bit of a gamification, but then
Execution.
yeah. So when the IPL was happening, I'm like, during the summer months, I'm like, our product teams, I'm like, went to town and they had like a cricket gamification on the whole platform, and where it was a fairly like comprehensive project that we kind of like try to pull off. And what that did was that it made people much more aware. I'm like, first of all, I'm like, cricket being what it is,
Sure.
it got a lot of people engaged in the cricket because ho raha hai, noise pe and so on. So let's go and explore. So that's the thing about just engaging. But then I'm like, when people came on and they found that it's not only about like say cricket, but I can now actually understand the product and what this particular ecosystem is delivering. That's where we actually took a sustained base jump, because you also know, I mean, like, you do something, you have a peak and you have a fairly big
People
trough.
just come in and go again. Yeah.
And that to me is not a win.
Doesn't sustain. Yeah.
That is
I mean,
not,
that's tactical, but doesn't kind of contribute over time.
yeah, somebody will have like a quarterly review and feel good about it. But I think I'm like, that's where I think the big unlock happened, where we saw a sustained move based.
What was this cricket thing about? If you can double click a bit.
Yeah, so I'm like, where you actually say that which team is going to be winning today and so on and so forth. And then you kind of like, have a streak going, and if you have like, a certain number of predictions that come true and so on and so forth. So people really like that.
So more like fantasy gaming-ish direction.
Yeah, but without the money.
But I mean, would that link in some fashion to the things that the guy is doing about his fitness or anything on the data of the app?
So that is like, how you actually got like the whole macro into the NoiseFit app.
So it's more like a layer on top of the existing app, but not necessarily connected to the core of it.
But then what that did was like, now when a person did the engagement with these kind of like, interventions, then it's like, okay, now I'm here, let me just see what else is there.
Oh, okay, so it got me back to the app by a tactical route, but then now I'm more engaged with the app.
Because then you actually like really tapped into the power of what these feeds and communities and challenges give you. And look, time spent is a currency that all of us are trying to optimize on, right? And once you actually help a person engage more with you, that person also starts to understand what are you good for and what kind of value are you adding. And I think that was like the
unlock.
Yeah.
I'm curious, you said cricket, and I'm like, okay, there's a certain percentage of people who will enjoy cricket, and they'll come to the app to do something with, let's say, prediction, and they'll start to look at, okay, I've come to this app and I see all of this stuff happening around, and maybe a good idea for me to also understand my sleep patterns in the last 7 days, and then they'll start engaging with that.
Yeah.
So in some sense, cricket just became a re-engagement strategy for you. People came in, and then they stuck around, is what you see the sustained growth has.
And I'm like, again, like, just say, going back and maybe like from a 15,000 feet view, one downside of like, say extreme targeting is that we just like look at that particular cohort
and you will not do much with anyone else.
Exactly.
Which is tricky.
And I'm saying they're like maybe a microcosm of like people who are like super interested in say fitness, or say for other categories, maybe fashion or something else altogether. I think the job of the incumbents in the category is to make sure that more and more people buy into this philosophy.
Sure.
But if you're going to be talking to a person who's not into fitness or all about the benefits of fitness, I'm like, theek hai, malum hai, lekin why should I do it? Which is where I think you have to appeal to something that he or she is interested in at that point of time, and then slowly lead them in.
Get them in.
And maybe I'm like, for us, cricket was the common minimum denominator.
Sure,
because of
something you found which is the largest, let's say, appeal.
Yeah, and then you kind of like, hey, now that you're here, why don't you like look around? And
but that's what makes me pretty amazed that you have 7 mil MAU and you have all of these different age brackets that are coming in, and each of them would probably have different hooks and entry points. And cricket is applicable, let's say, to a large number of people, but from a sustained mechanism, I would not be sure if you would be prepared to come up with every once in a while a new idea which will have a large enough base and play with it, because somewhere or the other you will end up segueing, okay, these are the 5 or 6 macro level segments and let me start now zooming in and double clicking. So now I break into 5 segments and then 7 and then 10 and then whatever.
Again, I mean, like, I think those are like challenges will come when we think that the industry is totally like,
sure,
stagnating or maturing or
so
like,
that's
there's a
still
headroom
early
to
in your
grow.
journey to get to that point.
Yeah.
So
like I'll give you an example, like, say smartphones, right? I mean, 2 years back, smartphone, and maybe I'm like off by a couple of tens of millions, but then what I remember, I think a couple of years back, the shipment of smartphones in the country on an annual basis, 170, 175 million. I think this year it's expected to be 140, 145, right? So the numbers have come down for various reasons, right? Maybe there's a supply chain disruption. Maybe now the phones are good, so people also like hold on to them for longer and so on and so forth. But the good part is that now maybe smartphones are also looking at various different ways by which you can get a person to buy your phone or
replacement
upsell.
cycles to reduce.
Yeah. And
which
that's
is what Apple does pretty well, right?
Yeah,
It'll be obsolete if you don't replace
right?
it.
C cable.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But and the ASPs have gone up because now they're building a little bit more vertical experience, deeper experiences. I think the ASPs were about $100 2 years back. Now it's about $200, $220, right? So from a unit level, the industry has come down, but from a revenue perspective, it's gone up.
Done better.
And that's because now people understand that make a base case samajh aa gaya hai. Now I'm asking for something else.
More.
So I'm saying ki as a smart wearables category, we are away from that particular.
Still in evolving days, growing fast enough without having to really oversolve for this problem yet.
Yeah, so I think I'm like the primary objective will be like to increase adoption right now, which is always going to be on the base case, the pyramid. Obviously, experiments will keep on running around, like the higher order benefits of the form factors and what we are doing as an ecosystem. But it's always about prioritization.
Of course.
Yeah.
So this is what it kind of tell me that, from your lens, given that you're anyway operating a unit economics possible business and you're shortening your replenishment or rather replacement cycles as well, the whole user engagement is an interesting piece, but not necessarily the top 2 thing that you care about at this point.
Yeah, I mean, like, you have to like start almost like, getting ready for tomorrow.
Sure.
Yeah, so you'll start doing them. And as you think,
the underlying infrastructure has to be in place. The data collection, the data organization, the data segmentation should still be in place.
Yeah, because like, another thing, I think while we were chatting just before the chat, I'm like, for some categories, it's almost like there's a visceral understanding of what, say, data does or what say, technology does and all. For product companies and all, I'm like, there's like a certain learning curve to that because maybe there are other functions also that take an important precedence, right? Supply chains, manufacturing, retails, and so on and so forth, inventory management, logistics, the 1,000 things, right?
Of course.
And if there's one thing that I've learned after being in digital for 15 years, it's actually bandwidth crunch is the single most important thing that people don't talk about. So if your bandwidth crunch of the management cadre, which sets the vision for the company, is looking at certain things from a priority perspective, certain other things get deprioritized. And which is whereas you might be saying, hey, segmentation, cohortization, upselling, cross-pollination is to maybe a much more native digital services company. They absolutely understand this thing.
Sure.
For a product company, there's an evolution around that thing.
I would imagine you'll be more forced to take a more aggressive stance / prioritize this higher if your price pressure is such in some sense. Because, if I were to draw a parallel with the spaces around automobiles, the money is not in selling the vehicle, the money is in servicing. So if you were to start selling the watches at a level where it's not unit economics-wise viable anymore, and that's the nature of competition in the marketplace, then you might be more pressure to do better, let's say, upsells, cross-sells on the post-sale side. But at this point, it's still early and you don't have enough, let's say, competing forces with you to force you in that direction.
Yeah, but having said that, I mean, like, as the industry also matures, then the challenges will be new.
First.
And which is where I think the whole thesis around what kind of infra do you need? What kind of curiosity do you need to, start experiment? What should induce that experimentation? It's already happening today.
I'm sure.
So
it's not like you're not doing anything. Of course, you're doing some, but from a mindshare perspective, this is going to always take a certain amount of time to evolve.
Yeah, but the good part is, from a trajectory perspective, the curiosity around these things is growing faster than maybe the other things.
Which is a good thing, I would imagine, because always keeps you ready for the future. So you got a very interesting journey at Noise and very interesting stage to start experimenting and figuring out those components. You have some time because it's not as crazy yet. But some of the things that you've learned through your last 15 years of journey, and we spoke a bit about Yahoo, we spoke a little bit about the automotive industry. Help us from whatever you think is still very pertinent and very interesting, and which has been your learnings or insights from those steps.
And so maybe I'll take a stab. I'm like, some lessons learned at Yahoo. Yahoo being the consumer internet mothership, horizontal, right? So you're like many deep verticals like Yahoo Mail, Messenger, Sports, Bollywood, Lifestyle, Finance, ABCD.
Sure.
But the
Portal, as they call it, right?
The portal, yeah, the purple portal. But the two main entry points were mail and the homepage. So mail was obviously a vertical experience of communication, but homepage was the horizontal experience. And this is what used to actually seed nascent verticals for Yahoo. I'll give you an example. I think, and I might be like a bit fuzzy on the nomenclature, but then I think Yahoo launched Yahoo Lifestyle back in the days. And your typical understanding of the consumer persona might be ki a much more younger audience. I mean, like, college going and so on and so forth. But the big data engines of Yahoo, through when we understood the segmentation and who was like, from a clickstream data perspective, we got to know a lot of people who were like, power users of Yahoo Finance, like who were looking at stock portfolio on a daily basis, were also like consuming a lot of like, this lifestyle content. And that's what like, changes the way you think, or the linear thinking ki ye log aise hi hain, ya phir
So
ye
sometimes a lot of, let's say, new discoveries will start happening which are not necessarily intuitive. And you're talking about all of this big data and personalization driven play back in 2008, 9, etc.
Yeah. So and that's where I'm like, once you understand, then imagine the power of creating like beautiful experiences. So the homepage that you would see versus mine would be dramatically different. I'm like, back in the days, so the 60 stories of yours versus my 60 stories will be very, very catered to me.
It's very fascinating because what's surprising is, given that this was happening in the Yahoo world back in 2008, and it's been 15 years since then, and it's still not sufficiently mainstream. I mean, I don't see everyone doing it, right? I see the Netflixes and the Amazons doing it, but a vast majority of websites that are, let's say, born in the last 5-7 years in India, I would imagine technology to become somewhat commoditized across this. But what's your impression? Why is it not happening today?
I think some of it is just like, prioritization. I think I'm like having been part of the startup ecosystem.
Well, we're able to live without it for now, and that's okay. Is that where it is?
And sometimes
other fish to fry.
Sometimes it just becomes a reality. I mean, like, and that's what I like, mentioned at the start of the our chat also. I think I'm like, Noise was fairly lucky that the product market fitment happened very, very early. A lot of like young companies, the first few years of their existence, they're just trying to get the product market fitment.
Yeah.
And which is why like, jo bhi karna hai, iske bare mein karna hai. And then you kind of like, say, now I've got my product market fitment right. Now let me see how can I personalize around the cohorts that are coming and so on. So I think it just like is an evolution. So not trying to be like, extremely charitable over here. But then I think I've seen this happen.
Yeah, so in some sense, there are other things that will move needle more than this would. So let's just practically solve for those before we address this.
Yeah, at least like get the hygiene in place. I'm like, that you have at least a product or a service that makes sense.
But I would imagine this whole lens of data, while of course, in case of Yahoo also, it was pretty central to making sure that the key metrics or the North Star that they were chasing in user engagement and the number of, let's say, page user sessions was fairly central. I would imagine that to be fairly central to a bunch of other businesses. And you were speaking about the whole automotive space where the amount of data getting captured, packaged, and then translated into consumer response or engagement or insights was almost critical and core to the play.
Yeah.
You want to talk about that example a bit more?
Sure. So while at Car Dekho, I'm like, through a lot of like data understanding and so on and so forth, we understood that typically for a new car buyer, I'm like, prior to digitization, a typical new car journey, buying journey used to be around 6 months. After digitization, it came down to almost 84 days. So you almost like half the purchase journey. And it's a fairly high involvement purchase. It's one of the things that you put a lot of like heart and soul into it because of the fallouts that can happen if you don't buy a good car, right? I'm like, there's a social disadvantage, there's a monetary disadvantage, there's a safety disadvantage, and so on and so forth. So we understood that a person is not looking for the perfect car, they're looking for the right car. And there's a distinction between these two statements, right? And then through those 84 days journey, we found that a large part, upwards of 85% of those journeys are very, very what do you call, compartmentalized and predictable.
Okay.
Right? I mean, like, and if I were to say 3 stages journey, first is just about awareness. Ki mere ko, this is my need state. Which are the cars that I can potentially buy in this budget? You will look at a used car in your budget. You will look like 6 different cars. You'll read a lot of content which is about that particular stage. A lot of reviews, a lot of like photos, a lot of videos and all, just to get to know the car.
Sure.
Right. That lasted for a certain amount of time, upwards of 25, 30 days, if memory serves me right. Then you know that these are the 2 or 3 cars that I'm interested in. That's when you go into the consideration stage.
Okay.
With just 2 or 3 cars and a couple of variants of those cars, of those models. And over there, the content type also changed. A lot of product content came into play. A lot of like comparison related content from an editorial perspective started to come. So not only did your mindset change, the content types also changed. And then you say, okay, this particular model, this particular variant is what I'm going to buy. Now you're saying, where can I buy it from? Will I get good offers, discounts? And how soon will I get the delivery?
Sure.
That's the transaction stage. What kind of EMI insurance can I get on this? What's my landed price?
Sure.
What's the EMI that if I were to pay, say, 20% would be, and if I were to pay 30%? So a lot of like those final commercial decisions. That was like a fairly shortish period. But then again, the content type absolutely changed, right? So you are looking at a person who's going on this 84-day journey across 3 different cohorts, across 3 different stages with very different content types supporting that decision making. Once you understood that, then the whole big data personalization engine of Car Dekho was making sure that as you go into this journey, you're getting these timely reminders or content or the website personalization happen for you as you were moving.
For your stage.
And then you keep on moving further
within this, there'll be more cohorts because there'll be somebody wanting X segment of car versus Y segment of car. So all that content that's getting delivered is sensitive to the stage as well as the choices that are being made.
Absolutely.
Or filters.
Yeah.
So in some sense, for that world, it just seems that it's just a more natural, a more early clarity because the kind of business impact this data absorption and corresponding personalization would have was probably very different compared to what might be for some other industries.
Because it's a digitally mature category.
Yeah.
90% of the new car buyers were already online. So you had no choice but to be like really, really good at the whole digitization experience.
Somewhere boiled down to the kind of space you're competing in and what the nature of competition is like, and the battleground is data centered or not as much.
Yeah.
Interesting. So Gaurav, this is very interesting from your journey as well as your current play at Noise. What I'd love to probably draw a couple of quick answers on is what's that one thing that you care about, let's say on a dashboard level or metric level, which you watch every day personally?
Oh, okay. So actually, I look at my app matrix very closely. App is like the engagement / education. So I'm like,
how and what else?
No, I'm like, what kind of like, feeds are happening, feeds are people looking at? I'm like, what kind of like, streaks are people like at right now? What kind of challenges are people indulging in? Because, so I think the acquisition matrix, the whole CAC and all those things are fairly, I mean, like, that
stabilized and matured, pata
चल रहा है. आपको मालूम है इतने में रहेगा, ranges वो रहेंगी and so on. So there's a seasonality. But then there's a network effect to this business. Not this business per se, but this part of the business.
The more people doing it, the more it'll become interesting for everyone else.
Yeah, the organic potential of this part of the business is much more. So maybe on one day, I mean, like, you might just like end up growing like much faster than what you would anticipated. And because this is a much more newer aspect of our go-to-market, I mean, which is where a little bit more attention goes in understanding what's happening. Because it's not that I'm coming from a place of understanding everything, right? So the data helps me understand the consumer behavior also a lot more. But then this is where the potential for organic.
Interesting. Where do you draw inspiration from when it comes to as a marketer, and you've had a fairly diverse set of products you're dealing with, and now you're dealing with a physical product, which has a strong brand value, but there's always a journey. So what's your, let's say, inspiration at this point?
Yeah, inspiration just comes from like working across categories of different life stages. And I have always seen that like, while the go-to-markets might be different, what medias you deploy, what tools you deploy can be a little bit different. But I think one thing that always has stood true, and that's what inspires me here, is that like, the growth mindset is the single biggest motivator for me. And this is again not visceral to a lot of organizations. There's a lot of silos. Ki marketing acquisition dekh raha hai, product retention, engagement.
I will want you to double click a little bit when you say growth mindset. What do you mean that?
Pretty much like, end to end. I mean, like, and it's an organizational design flaw sometimes. that your KPIs and KRAs and AOPs are structured in a manner which compels you to stop at a certain part of the consumer journey.
Lines drawing and handshakes being hard.
So growth mindset for me is like actually breaking down those silos and going across the entire consumer journey. I'm like, so as a say a performance marketer in a marketing setup, are you also looking at LTV and not just LTV? I mean, like, what are the services that he or she is consuming once they have actually bought your product or service?
I've seen a lot of interesting examples from places as odd as Oyo, where the performance marketer is supposed to know 30-day ROAS. What else has happened in the next 30 days. So I'm curious, in your lens, that was more of a people choice topic, that, okay, I'm going to get performance marketers who are sensitive to this and who are supposed to watch these metrics. In your world, is this an org design thing that there are growth orgs? I've seen that as a company play as well, that people design growth teams to have engineers and analysts as well as execution folks from a campaign lens. In your world, this is an org design play or like a pod play or a culture play or a mix? How do you see this?
So right now it's a nascent philosophy. I'm like, as I said, I'm like, being a product company, I'm like, we also like learning the ropes. How does this? Because there are many more other functions, I mean, that take your management bandwidth. But then that's to your prior question. I mean, that's the inspiration. If we can like unlock that philosophy in a digital CPG company, I'm like, imagine what happens to this world category.
I mean, you're at the right place in some sense, in the right position within the company to be able to drive this kind of evolution forward, and that's perhaps
that's the biggest inspiration, motivation, whatever North Star, whatever you want to call it. I mean, so for me, that is like the thing that really excites me, and and I think it's just cultural change. I'm like, while at Zoopy, I'm like, quick understanding. I'm like, your LTVs of a customer play out over 2 to 3 years, right? But then I'm like, when you're opening up a new channel of acquisition, it's giving whatever returns on a 30-day, on a 7-day, 15-day. How do you know what to scale or not?
Sure.
So if you're going to be like, say, optimizing on a, say, even a 7-day or a 15 or 30-day journey,
might not be effective.
There might be false positives or whatever. So if you are like, if you can like really optimize and build that connections between your 30-day ARPUs versus their 24-month LTVs, then you really unlock the whole growth philosophy. I'm like, from an acquisition and then retaining that particular person also. And spending your dollars where they really give returns to you.
It's surprisingly uncommon to look at this philosophy. So while of course I've seen the gaming folks being pretty obsessed that they need to see ROI on acquisition by the subsequent engagement beyond the first one, I see a lot of companies fairly disconnected from their acquisition and their retention lenses. You're optimizing for CAC, you don't necessarily care if this cohort has a better LTV than the other. Unfortunately, that's still a majority of companies.
And look, I mean, getting a low CAC is not a big deal if you like, just ignore the rest of the things, right?
I mean, you'll have to slow down your growth if you don't really want to maintain CAC. But in some cases,
you might just go down the affiliate route also, right? I'm going to give a low CAC.
Which will give you low CAC, but shitty cohorts.
That's what I'm saying. If you were to isolate yourself from that part of the reality, you can drive a lot of like low CACs.
I mean, you've been a 15-year digital marketer, so it comes very naturally to you. But trust me, for a large majority of people, it's still early days to think about this whole post-purchase cycle or repeat cycle or lifetime value cycle compared to the CAC. So we see that happening all the time. So where does noise end up in 2025? What kind of, let's say, non-numerical, but some sort of ambition that you would state?
I think if I were to just talk about inwards, I think hopefully while we are a product company, I'm like, but we are a digital services from a company, from a DNA background, from a DNA perspective. I think that is definitely, if that were to happen, then I think the commercial aspects will take care of themselves.
Automatically get there.
Yeah.
But that's a DNA evolution from a product to a service play, which is a hard one to translate.
It is.
All right. So wish you all the best with that, Gaurav.
No, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for doing this. Very interesting. And I think it's a slightly different conversation compared to whatever else I've had, but very insightful.
No, likewise.
Thank you so much.
Had a great time.